Hail travelers, and welcome to Knight's Realm Q&A, the first of its kind. Unlike most of my other videos, this is going to be an off-the-cuff sort of video, much like my tier list video. So, yeah, you guys sent me in a lot of questions, and I will be answering them in my off-the-cuff, rambly sort of manner. So, join me as we delve deep beneath the castle and begin our quest. First off, we have a question that asks, did you feel that characters like Jazz, Ironhide, Ratchet, Sideswipe, and the others were treated poorly in the Michael Bay films? And follow-up, which character suffered the worst out of the 5 films? Jazz, I actually think, was handled incredibly well. I'm actually a huge fan of Bay vs. Jazz. He's not my favorite version of the character. That would probably have to go to Transformers Animated. But of the robots introduced in Transformers 2007, Jazz is probably the best. At least of the Autobots. There are Decepticons that I like, but Jazz is mostly inoffensive. The worst part of him is I think he dies way too soon. Ironhide, I actually like his personality. My problem is in his design and his voice. Because Ironhide's always been kind of a reckless character. I mean, you go back to G1, he's constantly jumping into danger, which is unique because he's an older bot. Typically, you imagine that with the younger bots, like Hotshot, Hot Rod, Sideswipe, Sunstreaker. But here you have a bot as old as Optimus, who is wise and knowledgeable, and Ironhide is over here like, I'm gonna go in and take him out, Prime! And it's really fun. So I don't mind Ironhide's characterization in the Bayverse movies. My problem, again, is in his design, which I think is kind of ugly, and the fact that he was colored wrong, and I do know the reasons. But again, as I've said before, the fact that the digital cameras in Dark of the Moon look as good as they do on Dino and Sentinel, it's not as much of an excuse as people like to act like it is. Like, I get that Michael Bay is an artist of sorts, but your own vision should not trump what the story you're trying to tell is. That is my honest and humble opinion of character redesigns. Ratchet, I just don't think had enough to do. He was inoffensive, again, aside from his design, but as a character, I just don't think Ratchet had enough to do compared to a lot of the others. Sideswipe is much the same. Again, and his design I actually don't hate, I just wish that they had splashed some red on him. His design is actually pretty cool. But, again, he's just kind of there. And that's my biggest problem with a lot of the characters in these movies, is they're just kind of there. Like, the only Autobots that really get much in the way of character development are Optimus and Bumblebee, and even that, barely. If I were to choose characters that I think were done the dirtiest, of the Autobots, I would say Skids, because Skids in the comics is a much more interesting character than whatever that was in Revenge of the Fallen. Mudflap is a name that has been thrown around for a bunch of characters, so even though I don't like that character, I can't say that one specific character was done dirty. I hate that they turned Drift into a Japanese stereotype, because he's not. Like, Drift is much more of an anime character than he is a character from a stereotypical samurai film. So I would have much preferred if they had portrayed him as more of the anime protagonist type character, because Drift has always kind of felt like an anime protagonist. Of the Decepticons, though, there were a lot more that were done dirty. Starscream was done particularly dirty by the fact that he was a sniveling loser. As you can probably tell by my rewrites, I love it when Starscream is conniving. I love when he is constantly scheming behind Megatron's back. And while I do love different takes on the character, like Transformers Armada, which makes him a far more sympathetic character, my favorite versions of Starscream are always going to be the scheming backstabbers. Transformers Animated is, once again, as with Jazz, my favorite version of Starscream, because he's that perfect blend of sneaky and conniving, while also being incredibly powerful. Like, he's a challenge for the Autobots, and you can see why he's Megatron's second in command. Whereas the one in the movie, Ironhide in the beginning is like, "It's Starscream!" as if that's something that we should be afraid of. And Transformers nerds know why we should be afraid of him. He's the second in command. He's the next biggest Decepticon guy. But in the movie itself, there's really no reason for it. And that stupid slobbering he does, and his design is among my least favorite. Because there's ones like Ironhide and Ratchet that I don't like for that character, but I can see working for other characters. That design for Starscream is just bad. It's not good. Shockwave, much like a lot of the Autobots, didn't get enough to do. I did love his design. However, I thought Shockwave looked really cool, but he just showed up as a monster at the beginning and was creepy, and then he was at the end standing around until he got absolutely eviscerated by Prime. The Dinobots were not done well at all. They had no character, no personality. They were just roaring monsters. And I get not wanting to go full G1, what be Grimlock supposed to be doing? Tell me about Petro Rabbits again. I understand not wanting to go that route, but War for Cybertron was right there. The comics were right there. G1 Comics Grimlock is actually a pretty engaging character. So you didn't have to do G1, which leads me into a big problem I have with the movies and a lot of the discourse around the movies, is a lot of people are like, it's either G1 Sunbow cartoon or the movies, when there is so much else there. There are the G1 comics, there are the G2 comics, which aren't great, admittedly, but there's elements there. There's the Unicron trilogy, there's Beast Wars, there's Car Robots / RID-01, there's Transformers Animated, Transformers Prime, the IDW comics, the Dreamwave comics, now the Skybound comics. Like, there's so much more than just G1 versus Bay, and we need to stop acting like it's just G1 versus Bay. Beyond that, though, most of the rest of the characters I just don't think were utilized properly. But if I were to say the ones that I think were done the dirtiest, yeah, I would say Skids and Drift for the Autobots, and Starscream for the Decepticons. Moving on to the next question. What are my thoughts on the character of Wing Saber? For those of you who don't know, Wing Saber is a character who shows up predominantly in the Unicron trilogy, specifically Energon and Cybertron. He's fine. He kind of just feels like Jetfire Light. I don't have any negative feelings towards him, but I don't have any particularly positive feelings towards him. A lot of that really has to do with the shows that he stars in. Energon is garbage, and I absolutely hate it. And Cybertron is fine. I enjoy it for what it is, but I don't have the love for Cybertron that I do for Armada, for example. What are my thoughts on the 2005 IDW comics? So I actually mentioned this in my tier list video. I have mixed feelings of the 05 IDW. I'm a huge fan of how it began. The early 2005 IDW is really, really good, up there with some of the best Transformers writing. And even the later things, even though they made choices that I didn't like, it's incredibly well written from beginning to end. So I am a fan of that. I just don't like certain choices they made. I do not like heroic Megatrons. Like, if Megatron is going to quote-unquote redeem himself, I'd like him to do it in the Darth Vader style, dying as he does. That's why my favorite quote-unquote redemption for Megatron is in Armada, when he sacrifices himself to destroy Unicron. I like that a lot. It's a great send-off to that version of the character. And it's very thematically appropriate after everything he went through with Starscream and the whole Sideways telling them that the war is what keeps Unicron alive. Megatron basically did the smart thing. It was a very Megatron-y sacrifice. I'm not a huge fan of him going full Zuko, if that makes sense. But of course, again, it's objectively well written. The Lost Light and what was the other one? Dark Cybertron. Incredibly well written. I do love how IDW handles Shockwave. It's one of my favorite portrayals of that character. I don't like how they dismantled a lot of the mythos in the latter parts. Like, oh, it was all made up by Shockwave. That I didn't like. I liked Shockwave being behind a lot of the stuff. That was really interesting. But I didn't like him being the reason why we believe the things we believe. Part of the thing I love the most about Transformers is the mysticism. It sets it apart from a lot of the typical sci-fi robot stories. There's a magic here. These robots are sentient. They're alive. They're not just like the droids in Star Wars who, for some reason, have emotion. And that's not a dig on Star Wars. I love Star Wars, mostly. But the Spark, the Matrix, Vector Sigma, the Allspark, the Star Saber. I love the magic at the core of this universe. So trying to strip that magic away, I'm not a huge fan of. But again, there are parts, especially in the early days of the IDW comics, that I really do like. And then there are parts, especially in the later days, that I don't like. And I really hate what they did to RC. I hate what Simon Furman did, the backstory he created, and the retconned backstory I still am not a fan of. It felt weird. Like, one, Furman did not need to come in and do that whole, oh, all fembots used to be men because I hate the concept of fembots. So I understand what the people who came in and retconned it were doing. I still don't like it, but I don't blame them for that. I blame Furman for that. It's like, dude, get over it. These are magic, sentient robots that can turn into trucks and dinosaurs and things like that. You can get over some of them being feminine. Seriously, some people and their lack of suspension of disbelief. What Autobot and Decepticons do I think are underrated and overrated? Oh, let me think here for a second. Underrated, I would actually say that the other Seekers are underrated. Thundercracker, Skywarp, but even more than that, Acid Storm, Sunstorm. One of my favorite parts of the G1 cartoon was actually the Seekers, Skywarp and Thundercracker, kind of calling Starscream out on what he did. But too often, they're kind of just in later versions of the story, they're just portrayed as different colored Starscreams or yes men to Starscream, and I think that's disappointing. In terms of the Autobots, I think Hound is kind of underrated. Hound is a really interesting Autobot with his holographic technology, the fact that he's one of the more level-headed Autobots. There's a lot of Autobots with very strong personalities, like Cliffjumper, Hotshot, Prowl, Wheeljack, Ratchet, Ironhide. And then you have Hound, who's just kind of chill. Dude just is living his life, and I'm a huge fan of that. I'd honestly like to see a version of the story where Hound is a part of Team Prime. Again, not like in the movie, since in the movie he's basically an amalgamation of Bulkhead and Cup, and given Hound's name, which is another big problem I have with the movies, is they give these characters names that do not fit them at all. In terms of overrated, off the top of my head, I've always personally thought that the Stunticons were kind of overrated. I am not a huge fan of the Stunticons. In terms of combiner teams, they are significantly below Devastator and the Constructicons, and even Bruticus, who I'm a huge fan of. The Stunticons just feel unnecessary. Motormaster, he's designed to be an anti-Optimus, but he's not a very good anti-Optimus. I mean, I'm a Nemesis Prime fanboy, so of course I'm saying that. Like, my first thought when I saw they made the Legacy animated Motormaster is, I kind of want to get him and give him a Nemesis Prime head so I can have a Legacy animated Nemesis to go with the Legacy animated Prime, who I am planning on getting. I just haven't gotten him yet. Because I like Nemesis Prime. I like him far more conceptually than Motormaster. Like, when I think back to the Key Vector Sigma multi-parter in G1, the best part of that was the aerial bots. I much preferred the aerial bots to the Stunticons. The Stunticons, like, even the concept behind them, the whole, we cannot control the roads, we need something to control the roads. I was just like, wait a minute, you have Constructicons. Those guys are road vehicles. Yeah, sure, they're construction vehicles, but they're on the roads. It felt contrived. The Autobots wanting more aerial support made a lot more sense than Decepticons wanting more ground support. Especially since Megatron doesn't need to fly. Megatron can just drop down and walk because his alt mode is a gun. He doesn't need to... He flies as a choice. He doesn't need to fly. He can just get down on the road and walk. So can Soundwave. So I don't see... I think the Stunticons are overrated, and characters among the Stunticons that I do like, such as Breakdown, I tend to like other versions of the characters, like in Transformers Prime. That is actually my favorite version of Breakdown. In terms of Autobots that are overrated, I can't really think of many off the top of my head. Maybe some of the Wreckers. I'm not a huge fan of Whirl. I think he's a jerk. And yeah, that's the point of his character, but just because it's the point doesn't mean I have to like it. I actually do think the Wreckers as a team are kind of overrated in general. Not that I think they're bad, but they just kind of... I feel like everyone remembers Last Stand of the Wreckers as being this amazing story, and it is. And they think that the Wreckers will always be that. But more often than not, they're just kind of a bunch of loose cannons, and I'm not a huge fan of loose cannon characters unless they have non-loose cannon characters to even them out. Like I mentioned before with Ironhide being kind of a loose cannon, he works because he has Optimus to play off of. That's part of why I love the Wrecker episodes in Transformers Prime, because you have Ultra Magnus going up against Wheeljack and Miko, and then you have Bulkhead, who's kind of been tempered over time. And I want to note, when I say something is overrated, I don't mean it sucks. I don't think the Stunticons suck. I just don't think they're as cool as a lot of people pretend they are. They are not among my favorite characters in the franchise, and same with the Wreckers. I like individual Wreckers more than I like the Wreckers as a team. Like, I love Springer. Impactor's a really cool character. Of course, I love Bulkhead. So, yeah. What sort of characters do I want for a Transformers Marvel movie? Okay, so this one, I don't know exactly what it's saying. Am I saying, is it like a movie about the Marvel Comics? Which, in that case, I would want the G1 cast, because that's who was starring in the Marvel Comics. If it's for a movie created by Marvel, I mean, we could bring in Spider-Man, I guess. Spidey was literally in Transformers issue number 3, which is one of my favorite fun facts to throw around, because I'm also a huge fan of Spider-Man. And the fact that Spider-Man and Optimus Prime have canonically teamed up, the fact that Spider-Man has canonically been in the Decepticon base is one of my favorite little details. But, I mean, yeah, I'm not really sure what that question means. What are your plans for the Last Night rewrite? Give us a tease. To the latter part, no. To the prior part, I've actually posted about this several times on my community tab. I'm noticing that people comment a lot that haven't seen my community posts. I honestly highly recommend, like, for updates, check my community posts. I don't tend to make update videos. But my community posts, I have said before that The Last Night is an absolutely unsavable movie. I've tried to look at it from so many different angles. That movie is just bad. So I am throwing it out entirely and making my own conclusion to the Bayverse story, which is going to be a trilogy after I do this next rewrite, which will be the Lockdown bits of Age of Extinction extended into their own movie, because Lockdown deserves his own movie. I'm going to have a movie starring the Quintessons as the main antagonists, and then a two-parter with Unicron and Galvatron. What is the best thing that the Bayformers did story-wise? I have been on the record as saying that the first movie is actually a really solid Transformers story if you get rid of a lot of the Sam stuff. I think the setup for that movie is great. I love the concept of Megatron being the inspiration for a lot of human advancements. That's just a really cool idea to me, and I love that Transformers Animated replicated that. I think that the twist with Sentinel Prime and Dark of the Moon was done really well. The human collaborator plotline in Dark of the Moon was also really good. Dark of the Moon had a lot of really good ideas. Again, it was just bogged down by a lot of the unnecessary stuff with Sam and Bruce and Simmons that I just didn't need in my Transformers. Like, once we actually got to the meat with the Transformers, Dark of the Moon is actually a really fun movie. The problem is we have to wade through so friggin' much, and I don't like that. What is my favorite gimmick or special concept in the Transformers community? I'm a huge fan of combiners. I think combiners are really cool. I mentioned before that I really love Devastator, Bruticus, and Superion. So I really do like combiners. As an Armada kid, I love Minicons. Minicons are a lot of fun. I love the power-ups that Minicons can give, which is why I also like Target Masters, but only if they're actually robots. I don't like the idea of Nebulans being inside of them. I hate Headmasters, and I've mentioned that before. Super modes, I don't hate super modes. Again, as an Armada kid, I kind of do love that Prime had a super mode, but I kind of find myself wishing that Megatron had a super mode that didn't require combining with Tidal Wave. I compare that less with Prime super mode and more with Prime with Jet Convoy, with Power Linksing with Jetfire, which Power Linksing is another gimmick I'm a huge fan of. Flight modes for Prime is another thing. It's a staple of the universe, and I'm a really big fan of it. So yeah, Minicons, I'm a huge fan of Minicons. Combiners, Power Linksing, which is just combiners but with two characters, and super modes, I like those. Like, if the gimmick adds playability instead of taking it away, I like it. Headmasters, I don't like what Headmasters adds. So Headmasters does add something, I just don't like what it adds. Things like missiles, I can take or leave. I don't hate missiles, but I kind of just prefer standard blasters. Mech-Tech weapons are some garbage. I like the idea, but the implementation, like, those things are ugly. Like, I do not remember a single Mech-Tech weapon that I thought looked good. There probably are some that don't look too bad, but I don't remember many. So, I got a lot of questions about Transformers 1. Did I see it? What did I think of it? I have not seen it yet. I am planning on seeing it this next week, and I will post a review once I have seen it. So, please do not spoil it for me. Please do not pester me about that. Once I have seen it, I will record a review of it. It will also be unscripted because it'll be my fresh thoughts. I'm also planning on later revisiting my Rise of the Beasts review, which was one of my first videos, and doing kind of a 2 years later or 1 year later, however long it's been. I don't know how long it's been, but a retrospective, like looking back on it, because fresh out of the theater, I was kind of hyped about that movie, but as time has gone on, my opinion has lessened a bit. I still think it's a decent movie, but it's not as good as I thought it was. Do I have thoughts of adding the Seacons to my future rewrites? Not really. The Seacons are one of many unnecessary combiner teams, in my humble opinion. Like, up there with the Terracon, the Technobots. I don't need them. I don't need them. Like, they were made to sell toys. Like, so many things were. Like, hey, you like Sea Monster Decepticons? Here, have Sea Monster Decepticons. Which, cool. Okay, I care more about the characters. I buy the toys because I love the characters. I don't love the characters because I love the toys. So I'm kind of the backwards version of that. Like if I see a character I don't care about, like Cloud Cover or Road Racer or anyone like that, I'm not going to buy a figure of that character. But if I see a figure of Optimus Prime, of Hotshot, of Megatron, Nemesis Prime, Jetfire, Grimlock, Drift, those are characters I will buy. Because I love those characters and I care deeply about those characters. The Seacons are just not characters I care much about, and I don't see how they would fit into my plans. So yeah. Which of the comic series for Transformers do I think is the best? Honestly, Skybound. I honestly feel like Skybound is the best so far. IDW had a really great start, but like I said, in my opinion, it tapered off there near the end. I love the Marvel comics, but they are very much a product of their time. There were a lot of aspects of the mythos that had not yet been solidified. Dreamwave I love, but it's incomplete. Skybound, on the other hand, sure, it's ongoing, but everything I've read is just so good. It has peak characterization. It is a perfect blend of everything that makes Transformers work. There's intensity, there's moments of levity, there's moments of gentility. That scene with Prime and the deer just cemented this version for me. That was such a good scene. Where do I get my inspiration for my Transformers rewrites? Primarily from the aligned continuity. You may have noticed that I had Orion Pax as an archivist, I had Megatron as a gladiator, and things like that. The aligned continuity has my favorite version of Orion and Megatronus, D16. It is, in my opinion, the best. I like Orion as an archivist because as a student of history myself, the idea that someone can look at the history of his world and realize, hey, our world is kind of falling apart, is very compelling to me. I also take a lot of cues from the tie-in comics from the Bay movies, because the Bay movie tie-in comics are really well done, and I wish that the movies were as well written as them. I take some things from IDW, a few things from things like War for Cybertron, but again, that's aligned continuity. And of course, things from G1, both the comics and the show. I haven't really taken anything from Armada for the rewrites because it really wouldn't fit. Thoughts on the Quintessons? I like the Quintessons. I think they were a little overdone in Season 3 of G1. Like, it got to the point where I kind of got sick of them. But now whenever they show up, I get hyped. Like, Quintessons are a really cool concept. They're a great villain that isn't the Decepticons or Unicron. The way they tie into the Transformers backstory, I'm a huge fan of. Not the G1 version, more the aligned version, the they tried to conquer them thing. So yeah, I'm a fan of the Quintessons. I don't think they're always portrayed particularly well, but I do like them. If I could create my own Transformers character, what would they be? I've never really thought about that. Chances are I'd make one of each. I'd make an Autobot and a Decepticon to kind of balance things out. If it were a Decepticon, I don't know. Maybe like a stealth bomber? Something like that? For an Autobot? Well, more jet Autobots never hurt anybody. Yeah, it's not really something I've ever really thought about. There's things that I make OCs for, like Dungeons and Dragons or Bionicle, but for Transformers, I kind of just don't. Okay, actually, no. There is a kind of Autobot I would make, and it's one who turns into the Batmobile. Just straight up a ninja-style Autobot who turns into the Batmobile. I would 100% have an Autobot like that because that would be so cool, because I love Batman, I love the Batmobile, and a ninja-style robot who turns into a Batmobile-esque, and I'm talking Batmobile, not Bat-Tank. So like the 90s cartoon, the 89 movie, even the 66 series. So not like the Tumbler, I'm talking like the car, the Batmobile. I think that would be really cool. What was my favorite change in the Bayformers rewrites? Off the top of my head, I'm really proud of how I handled Sentinel. I think I handled Sentinel really well. He was a really well done. I feel like I took the ideas that were in Dark of the Moon and fleshed them out in a way that made that character work even more. I was surprisingly happy with how Nemesis turned out. I was not expecting his story to go the way that it did, but I'm a huge fan of it. Shockwave's scheming, I thought, was done really well. The fact that I let him stay. I'm a huge fan of how I did the Fallen. That was a character that was woefully done. It's the villains. It really is the villains that I think I've done the best with. I think that I really took some lackluster villains and made them amazing. And that opening scene on Cybertron in the first movie, I love that. That was my first idea when I was coming up with the rewrites, and I still love it to this day. What are my favorite animes? I don't watch a lot of anime, like aside from, the Unicron trilogy. But the few animes I do watch, I like Death Note. I think Death Note is a really well done anime. Just a really well done story in general. Light is a very interesting villainous character. Again, I don't really have a lot of an anime background. I kind of just watch shows that I like. I don't watch all of one particular style. So I have to say Death Note. Would I consider making what if videos? Like, what if XYZ thing happened in particular universe? Maybe. I don't have any plans for it, but maybe. What was my introduction to Transformers? I've actually mentioned this a few times. It was kind of a simultaneous Armada G1. My dad grew up on G1, because I am not from the 1980s, believe it or not. I am a younger man than that. But my dad grew up on Generation 1, and so he had some G1 things playing, but my first real memory of Transformers was Transformers Armada. Specifically the episode where Hotshot loses the Starsaber to Sideways. That episode is seared into my memory. So yeah, I was a huge fan of Armada. Then I watched the 86 movie and I fell in love with G1. Then I watched more of Armada and G1. So yeah, it was a combination of Armada and G1. When am I going to start work on an Arrowverse Batman series set before Batwoman? I don't think I ever said I would. Like, don't get me wrong, the idea of Arrowverse rewrites actually kind of speaks to me. I might do that at some point because I used to love the Arrowverse, but I hate how it fell off. And I've always said that an Arrowverse Batman series would go hard, but the when am I going to part of this question makes me go, I never said I was going to. So again, I might, but don't expect any announcement of that anytime soon. I've got to finish my current slate. Am I completely satisfied with how I rewrote the Bayverse films so far, or is there something I would have gone back and changed? The only thing I can think of off the top of my head that I would have changed for myself, for things that I wrote, I would have moved Shockwave's lair to somewhere on like the West Coast instead of Hong Kong, because I had to bring in that contrivance of the shuttle to get them to Hong Kong. So keeping him in the States would have been much less contrived. So for things that I did, that's the only thing I can think of. In terms of things I would change overall, I would not have Revenge of the Fallen be the second movie. I feel like introducing a villain like that in the second entry of a story is a mistake. The Fallen is a character who, much like Thanos, needs build-up. So the fact that they just kind of threw him into the second one was a bad idea. Also, that movie was just bad. So when writing that movie, I had to make it work. And again, as I said, I'm proud of how I made the Fallen work. I think I made him really awesome. But if I were to do a My Transformers 2, it would not be Revenge of the Fallen. It would just be another Megatron-centered story. Do I think Robots in Disguise 2015 would work better in the Prime animation style, and if it had classic characters from Prime mixed in with the new cast? Neither of those things would have saved it. RID's sole problem was the writing. And the tone. The writing and the tone. The animation I actually do like. I think that sort of cel-shaded cartoon mixed with CG animation looks really cool. It's kind of comic booky, and I'm kind of a fan of it. In fact, when the show was first coming out and I saw the new art style, I was like, oh, that looks awesome. So, no, I don't think changing the art style would have saved that show. Nor do I think adding more characters from Team Prime would have saved it. No, that show needed better writing. It needed to not retcon what came before. And it needed to have a better tone. If it could have kept the exact same cast, it could have kept the exact same premise, hunting down Decepticon fugitives, but if its tone was closer to Prime's, it would have been so much better. And if the writing was closer to, like, Prime Season 2, and even Season 1, because Season 3 is when the writing started to go downhill, and even then it was still pretty good. If it kept that kind of tonal consistency, because the rest of the Aligned continuity is a pretty tonally consistent continuity. It's not consistent in a lot of other things, but it's tonally pretty consistent. So yeah, no, the art style, the animation, and the characters are not the problem with that show, it is the tone. What gave me the idea to do the rewrites? Well, a few things. Firstly, I like to watch a lot of people rewriting bad or disappointing movies on YouTube. People have mentioned Phoenix Studios rewrites of the Bayformers movies. I watched those. Troy Oboyo's fanboy rewrites. I don't watch those as much anymore, but I used to. I've seen plenty of rewrites for things like Spider-Man 3, the Star Wars sequels, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin. These movies that are just disappointing. And I thought, what if I threw my hat in the ring? Do I actually have a Transformers collection back at home? Yes, very much so. And it's still growing. Will I be introducing Marissa Fairborn in my final bit of the Bayverse rewrites? Maybe? Maybe? I don't know, maybe. What gave me the idea for the character analysis videos? I like to talk about things. I talk to myself and my family and my friends about things all the time. Analyzing plot points, analyzing people misunderstanding characters and plot points. Some of my earliest ones, like my Defending Optimus Prime one, my Darth Vader one, are about misconceptions that I feel people have about these characters, specifically Transformers Prime, Optimus Prime. I like to talk about characters to myself, to my family, to my friends, and I thought, hey, what if I could monetize my autistic hyperfixations? And so I decided to start doing that. After rewatching the ending of Dark of the Moon, what is your honest opinion about the scrapped ending of Dark of the Moon, the one where Optimus and Megatron agreed to end the war? I'm a fan of it. I actually really do like it. For the actual movie, it was the superior choice. It would have been a much better ending than Optimus going ape mode. But for my own rewrite, considering the ultimatum Megatron gave in Revenge of the Fallen and all the setup and build-up in Dark of the Moon, it wouldn't have worked for my rewrite, but for the actual movie, it would have been a better ending. Did I like Scorn from Age of Extinction? I think Scorn looks cool, but much like the rest of the Dinobots, he didn't really do anything. And the last one here, who would I cast in each of my rewrites? I've actually written several things about this in comments before, but obviously Optimus Prime is Peter Cullen. I'd bring people like Phil LaMarr back to play Jazz, Johnny Youngbosch as Bumblebee, Fred Tasticore for the first couple movies as Megatron, but then I slipped into Frank Welker in Dark of the Moon. Frank is my favorite Megatron, but I do like Fred's as well. Starscream, I'd probably keep Charlie Adler because I really like his portrayal, even if I don't think the character was particularly well done. For the humans, the only thought I really had was Jensen Ackles as Cade. But I'm not gonna name every single character because there are a lot of characters in those movies. But like Tony Todd as the Fallen, I'd keep Peter Cullen as Ironhide because he was awesome as Ironhide. Throwing in a lot of my favorite voice actors like Troy Baker, Nolan North, Matt Mercer, Laura Bailey. Like, good voiceover actors is what I would use. So that is a wrap on this Q&A video. I thank you all for joining me on my quest, and I will see you all on our next adventure, whenever that may be.